I imagine that many of you these days are constantly searching for information about what is happening in Israel. The war, which suddenly broke out a few days ago, was unexpected by some and predicted by others. The invasion carried out by the militias of Hamas, the Al-Aqsa brigades, and the Islamic Jihad from Gaza towards the Israeli hinterland. It's just the latest episode, one of the bloodiest in a long conflict that has been ongoing since 1948, or in some ways even before, since the formation of the State of Israel. Well, we at Inside History have decided to dedicate a small mini-series for further study, hoping to help all of you who follow us and support us to navigate in a consistent, practical, and comprehensive way in the great cauldron of war in the Middle East, Episode 1 of the bloodiest in a long conflict. In this first chapter, we tackle the roots of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We start by defining a fact that cannot be denied. One land for two peoples who historically have never had a land. Just to say, the Jews have been claiming the land of Israel since 70 AD from the destruction of the last temple in Jerusalem. Since then, the famous diaspora began. The Jews spread first throughout Europe and then the rest of the world. And then the Palestinians, a population of Arab origin, but not entirely Muslim, in fact, who settled in the area, starting from the various migrations that affect the area from the 4th century AD. And that stratify mix with other ethnicities, but they have never received an imprinting, a clear recognition of autonomous nation. The Great Clash occurs in the 20th century. It occurs when the two respective national foci first claim one and then the other the status of nation. The nation is not simply a state. The nation is being recognized as an ensemble with its own language, its own traditions, a history of its own. For example, there is the Armenian nation, which is not exclusively the state of Armenia, but also all the immigrants, mainly in France. There is the Italian nation, and it existed well before the unification of Italy in 1861, as much as Metternich defined Italy as a geographical expression. There is a Jewish nation, in this case Israeli. There is a Palestinian nation. The trouble is that making two such different and long unrecognized nations coexist, neither from one side nor the other, is problematic, very, very problematic. It is also for the United Nations. Think of today's United Nations, which was born from the ashes of the failed League of Nations. And on the basis of that Atlantic Charter, signed in the midst of World War II by Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, they find themselves facing, as soon as given, already several issues. One of these is precisely the former British mandate over Palestine. Moreover, from 1919 onwards, Great Britain administers much of the Middle Eastern area. In the name of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, an agreement we could call it under the table, signed in the midst of the Great World Conflict. The first, the famous Great War between Mr. Sykes and Mr. Picot, representatives respectively of the British and French foreign ministries, these two gentlemen acting on behalf of their respective governments. Well, these two gentlemen decide while the war is ongoing to divide the spoils of what will no longer be the Ottoman Empire. Arabia will be left alone. It will officially be left to the Hashemites, who, however, will lose it a few years later in a civil war with the Wahhabis of Al-Saud. The rest of the peninsula is divided. The Kingdom of Iraq is created from scratch, but it existed before. The Kingdom of Transjordan is created and entrusted to a Hashemite. This too is entrusted to a Hashemite. But they are both puppet regimes. They were dependent and not independent. Dependent on whom? From Great Britain, there's Syria, there's Lebanon, all under the French. And then there's Palestine. Palestine, which in the 20s begins to see a massive Jewish immigration. Driven by what? There's a word that for some sounds like an insult or a bad word, in any case, Zionism. But do you know what Zionism means? It mainly derives from Mount Zion, one of the hills of Jerusalem. According to Jewish tradition, it is a hill of high religious importance. However, the term Zionism refers to the desire to give the Jews a homeland on earth. Those Jews who are scattered, as we have said, all over the globe, between the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, begin to form a sort of national consciousness. The credit goes to a journalist. His name is Theodor Herzl. He is Viennese, but he is Jewish, and Herzl witnesses at the beginning of 1896 an event that shocks him. Maybe some of you have even met him already. This event, maybe you've seen it in the cinema, but it was depicted in a widely followed film by Roman Polanski, The Officer, the Spy. That event is the degradation of Captain Dreyfus, a French artillery officer falsely accused with tampered evidence of high treason. The story then clarified that Dreyfus was merely a victim of others' curses, but that public degradation, accompanied by a hate campaign, anti-Semitic hate, had driven Herzl to write a text, the Manifesto of the Zionist Movement. And what was written in this manifesto? The will to give back to the Jews, scattered all over the world, a homeland. Between the late 19th and early 20th centuries, European Jews faced significant hardships. In fact, it's not just France where post-defeat revanchism of 1870 exists. The suspicions towards both the Jews and the Alsatians, and Dreyfus had the fatal flaw of being both Jewish and Alsatian, made the atmosphere poisonous. It's just the will of the Tsarist police to create the perfect casus belli to justify the pogroms, the massacres. It is from Tsarist Russia that the first Jews flee and go to Palestine, stimulated by Herzl's writings and the desire to find a homeland. In Palestine, however, it must be said that for several centuries, a small Jewish community still resisted, which initially did not look favorably on this new immigration. However, the first few years go well. What changes is the defeat of the Ottoman Empire in the First World War and the disintegration of the Tsarist Empire. The defeat of the Ottomans creates, as we have said, a partition of the old empire. The disintegration of the Tsarist Empire causes further escapes. There are not only the so-called White Russians, not the Belarusians. We are talking about the Mensheviks, the opponents, the Bolsheviks. No, there are also the Jews who are fleeing, looking for a promised land, looking for a new homeland, and they begin to move more and more towards Palestine, towards Jerusalem. After all, the Jews themselves among them, when they celebrate, say, next year in Jerusalem. There is a cultural, religious, historical root in all of this. The trouble is that the initially uncontrolled influx of a real migration causes repercussions within the British mandate, because the British themselves are not prepared to welcome all those people and reorganize them, and repercussions within the Arab community, which, as much as it is placed under the protection of the English, does not appreciate it, because more people equals less land to live on. More settlements are seen as a usurpation. That's where the future Arab-Israeli conflict is born. That's where the first fractures begin to appear. Fractures that occurred between the late 1920s and early 1930s, even with pogroms, even in Palestine. The instigator of these pogroms is the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, a Sunni religious authority. Al-Husseini decides to incite the local population against Jewish immigration. The irony of fate. The victims of these pogroms are not the European immigrants, but those Jews who have been living in Palestine for centuries. The small local community is being massacred. From that moment on, the English intervene, putting brakes on immigration through the so-called White Paper. They even implement a naval blockade to prevent ships full of hopeful Jews from landing on the beaches of Palestine. World War II adds other elements to a tragedy that we could call perfect. The Holocaust, as we know, represents one of the greatest human tragedies. And when the war ends, when all the horrors in the extermination camps are discovered, the world is shocked, and the English themselves abandon the White Paper, once again giving the green light to immigration. With incidents involving many refugees from the camps. Directed to Palestine, Arab route, it is followed by British warships. It is diverted to Cyprus. The people on board at a certain point stage a hunger strike. They will either land in Palestine or they will all die on board in the port. It's a scandalous case, that of the president of the world, but there's more to it, because after the pogroms of the 30s, the Jews in Palestine organized self-defense units. There's Ghana, which is a real self-defense militia, and then there are terrorist formations, the Irgun, and from a branch of this, the Stern Gang. They are extremists, they are ultra-nationalists, Jews. For them, the important thing is to conquer all the land, to take everything that is necessary. And it is these formations that are attacking not only Arab villages, but also the English themselves. They attack police stations, checkpoints, even blowing up an entire wing of the King David Hotel, the hotel that houses a good part of the British Mandate's headquarters in Palestine. The terrorist attack on the King David Hotel is the classic straw that breaks the camel's back. From that moment on, the British hand the mandate back to the United Nations. And what does the United Nations do? They discuss until they come to a resolution. A resolution that officially recommends the partition of the former mandate into two separate states, one for the Jews and one for the Palestinians. The term Palestinian begins to be used to define that Arab community that inhabits the territory. It's a community that is not recognized as Egyptian, not recognized as Syrian, not recognized as Lebanese, not even recognized as Jordanian. Palestinians, people without a flag, without a nation, without anything that can guarantee their legitimate aspirations. The resolution that number 181 voted on November 29th, 1946, recommends this division. A bit over there, a bit over here, with Jerusalem as a free city, as a separate entity that guarantees the rights of all, but does not belong to either of the two states. It's a utopia, the beautiful utopia, the one theorized at the General Assembly of the United Nations, but it's not a practicable utopia, because immediately after the proclamation of the State of Israel, in a wing of the Tel Aviv Museum, where the trait of Teodoro Erdogan stands out, the first of the Arab-Israeli wars begins. Israel, which is not yet a state, but which is struggling to assert itself as a state, is attacked by Egypt, Iraq, the Kingdom of Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon. Sure, not all armies participate equally, but notice one thing. The Arab republics, the Arab kingdoms, do not intervene to protect the Palestinians. They don't care. What they want is to take slices of the loot. They don't want a Jewish state because in reality, they want to get their hands on Palestine. You can see it at the war's end in 1949. Yes, a state of Israel emerges, but everyone has taken something. Egypt took control of the Gaza Strip until 1967, while the Kingdom of Transjordan took the West Bank. The West Bank, which by the way is the most fertile area of the entire plain around the Jordan. Those that were supposed to be territories given to a Palestinian state, which, however, has no structures, no leaders, no nothing, are taken by other states. Well, this is one of the great distortions of the Arab-Palestinian conflict. Think about it. Many proclaim themselves patrons of the Palestinian cause, but few give up something to have a Palestinian state because a Palestinian state can really be born. It's no coincidence that until the mid-60s, Palestinians were essentially unwanted guests in their own land, administered by other states. They live in refugee camps. In the West Bank, in Transjordan, in Gaza, that would be their land. Yet they live as barely tolerated guests by Egyptians and Jordanians. Then history will have several changes. It will experience various conflicts. We will talk about it in the next episodes. What is striking about all this, however, is that it took until the Oslo Accords of 1993 for there to be real prerequisites for the founding of a Palestinian state. To implement that, the resolution of the General Assembly of the Award. How many years pass? From 1947 to 1993. Do the math. 46 years. It takes 46 years to begin to sketch out a division of the land to give birth, above all, to a real Palestinian state. While the Israeli state, however, has solid structures at its birth, a government, a semblance of a parliament, what will later become the Knesset. It has state structures. The Palestinian state has nothing. and essentially has to borrow what it finds, absorb it, reorganize it also with structures. Because if we have reached the modern situation where there are almost two Palestinian states, the West Bank, under the Palestinian National Authority, and the Gaza Strip, governed for many years now by Hamas, it's because it lacks, and has always lacked, unfortunately, to the Palestinian people, an authentic national consciousness. It has always been thought in the Palestinian context to be able to reclaim a land that has been idealized, but without precise boundaries, without a precise structure. Reclaiming what had been taken away by the Jews has been the mantra for a long time from the Palestinian fighting formations. To those of these protagonists of pure acts of terrorism, even in Europe, the Zionist enemy, that word that we have already said, has a negative connotation, even though it actually originates with nobles, you mean? But if Israel, despite all its difficulties, despite all its structures, its contradictions, has nevertheless become a democratic state of Western mold, the fact that there is no Palestinian counterpart, it is clear, further increases the difficulties. And then to mix everything up, there are those extreme opposites, those opposite nationalisms that once again separate what should be equal. Because I leave you with a small final reflection. We are all human beings. We breathe the same air. We drink the same water. John Fitzgerald Kennedy said it many years ago, and he was right. It doesn't matter whether we are Caucasian, Afro-Asiatic, Inuit, Indian, Amerindian. It doesn't matter. We can be Jews and pray to Yahweh. We can be Arabs and pray to Jesus Christ rather than being Muslims. Or maybe we follow one of the many doctrines that have arisen in the area, defined as heretical by the major revealed religions. We speak Italian or English or French, German, Spanish. Maybe we speak that new Hebrew language that arose in the 40s and 50s, or we speak Arabic. We are all human, but unfortunately a dark evil divides us. It's called hypernationalism. It's an evil that leads us towards disaster. Because hypernationalism means identifying one's own nation above all the rest of the other peoples and the rights of others. It means that we arrogate rights to the detriment of others, or even deny others access to fundamental rights. This is the real evil. If there is Hamas on one hand and the Al-Aqsa brigades, Islamic Jihad on the other hand, there are religious extremists. Those who do not accept to divide the land, do not accept not to build new settlements, indeed to demolish illegal settlements built over the years. This is the real problem. One should give up on one side and the other certain very arrogant, very distrustful attitudes that only lead to discount. Will we ever succeed? We from the Inside History channel explain it, and we give you an appointment to the next episodes dedicated to the tragedy of Palestine and Israel. Thanks to everyone